Hello and welcome to 50 Years Ago this month with Steve and Dave. This month we're going to be looking at the chart from July 17th, 1971. And to kind of put this all in a historical context, let's talk about just a few of the things that were going on that month. For one thing, July 1st saw the ratification of the 26th Amendment. Mr. History Prof, what does that amendment say for the few people out there who might not know?
There we go. That lowered the voting age to 18, from 21 to 18. And it really was in response to a clamor coming from the Vietnam War protests. Again, young men were being drafted at 19, but of course then weren't able to vote. And so there was this notion then that young people should be able to participate politically. I think on the whole, it's been kind of a mixed bag, right? This youngest tier of voters has always been the least likely to participate in elections, and that was even true in the 70s. But what's your sense about this, Dave, and the importance of this amendment?
Well, I agree. I think potentially, especially back then when we're talking about baby boomers, the 18 vote could have been a game changer. And I think a lot of people expected it to be.
I think that's right.
Much more so than it actually turned out to be. I think evidence of that was the landslide election of Richard Nixon in 1972.
It's true.
Which Nixon probably would have won anyway, but it wouldn't have been a landslide. I think that's safe to say. If the 18-year-olds had really gotten out and voted en masse, that wouldn't have happened.
I think in retrospect, the amendment, it's an important symbol, and it really, I think, very much reflects the times, but as having a kind of meaningful effect on the on elections, or really even candidates and that kind of thing. I just think it's been pretty negligible. So yeah, but that definitely was a big moment, and that amendment passed pretty quickly, as I recall. It steamed through state houses, yeah.
Okay, July 3rd, Jim Morrison died in Paris. We've talked a little bit about this and the fact that, the Doors were charting at this time.
That's right.
In fact, I think they're in the top 40 this month.
That's right.
With Riders on the Storm. But of course, Jim Morrison was the core of that group, and
right.
his death pretty much meant an end to their dreams of superstardom.
I think that's fair. It's the Doors, of course, went on to record a couple of more studio albums as a trio, but they weren't particularly successful. Morrison was really, at this point, and had been in steep decline for a while. His drinking had become deeply problematic. It disrupted their stage performances. And Morrison himself had begun to put on weight and was frankly a kind of shell of his earlier self. But nevertheless, the news of his passing in Paris was really a shock.
Right. Deal. And it's worth pointing out that that's the second rock and roll death in the year. We also had Janis Joplin dying at 27, like Jim Morrison, in January, I think. I don't know. It was earlier in the year.
It was earlier, yeah.
So it was not a good year for rock and roll in that sense.
That's for sure.
January 6th, Louis Armstrong died.
Yeah, Satchmo. Louis Armstrong, who was a beloved figure in jazz and really in popular culture by this point, noted trumpeter, was a kind of international figure. Louis Armstrong, for example, went on tours sponsored by the United States government. He toured Eastern Europe, he toured in Africa as a kind of goodwill ambassador. And I think it's safe to say he was beloved. And arguably the most famous figure from jazz of that era. And
you can still hear Wonderful World being played over here in Germany all the time. So he was 69 years old, died of a heart attack on January 6th.
Yeah.
On January 10th, the National Women's Political Caucus was founded with such luminaries as Betty Friedan, Shirley Chisholm, Gloria Steinem, and Bella Abzug. So some of the big names from the feminist movement of that time.
No question.
And the whole idea was to put together a caucus that would support female candidates and female issues in political elections.
And and to that point, then Chisholm runs for president in the following year,
and does surprisingly well.
She does. She really does.
Just surprises the hell out of everybody. But she was a dark horse.
Yeah, absolutely.
A black woman running for president. So it's like, what are her chances? Well, yes, she became a kingmaker in some conventions as well.
That's exactly right. It is the case that in the early 70s, the women's movement was becoming more politicized, and there was this effort to get more women involved in the electoral process. And there also, of course, was an eye toward constitutional amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment. And it seemed as though, in the early 70s, it seemed as though this project was really on its way. Now,
the momentum was definitely in their favor. It was very strong momentum. It looked like it was just going to be a pushover, right?
I did. That's obviously not what happened. Later in the 70s, strong opposition to the ERA, for example, comes.
Well, two words: Phyllis Schlafly.
She's
right.
She's an enormously important figure in this regard. Yeah, she was the human roadblock. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. On the 15th of July, 1971, Nixon announced that he would be visiting Red China as the first U.S. president to ever do so.
This was a momentous announcement. The United States and China had not had diplomatic relations dating back several decades. There just was very little.
Well, to the Cultural Revolution, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right. Yeah, so maybe before, in fact. It's easy to lose sight of this because Nixon has become, I think, almost a kind of caricature in history as we think about Nixon primarily only in the terms of Watergate. But he was a very forward-thinking leader when it came to international relations, for example. And this is...
But, he also made his early career as someone writing the tailcoat of McCarthy, right?
That's for sure,
anti-communism was like his main thing. So
it was as
for
a
him
representative
to make some movement towards communist China was huge.
That's right. Now this comes on the heels of the so-called ping pong diplomacy, where the United States table tennis team was invited to China to play a series of exhibition matches. But China was an enormous mystery to the world. It had been a hermit kingdom for decades. And so when Nixon made this announcement, and then of course when he eventually then made his way to then Peking, it was people had no idea. People just had no sense of what China was, really had very little sense of who Mao was. This was an enormous achievement.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, because as a history professor, this is your thing, but Mao Zedong was still alive at that point. He would be the partner in these negotiations.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, it was. Okay, so Mao dies in 76, and Mao was a feeble. Zhou Enlai was his right-hand man, and it was Zhou Enlai who had the major role in negotiations. But yes, Nixon and Mao met, toasted, all of that. It was, and that trip to China then was covered kind of wall to wall. Networks broke in for the coverage because, again, people had not really seen China. And so what was Peking like? What did Mao look like? All these things. It was an enormous thing.
Yeah. Okay. And the last thing that I'd like to talk about is on the 19th of July, the South Tower of the World Trade Center was topped off at 1,362 feet. It was the second tallest building in the world.
The completion of the Trade Center was celebrated really across the United States. It was, I think, seen as, once again, a great kind of American achievement. And the trade centers for several decades then, right, became really the sort of the central feature of the New York skyline. But yeah, it was a big deal when those.
Yeah, for just over 3 decades.
That's right.
3 decades and a couple months.
That's the case. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so that is the historical context. Let's take a look at what the charts are saying.
Well, I can tell you that from the chart of July 1771, at number 1, it's Carole King with the double A side. It's Too Late and I Feel the Earth Move, and this comes, of course, from the magisterial album Tapestry, right? A couple words about Carole King, Dave.
Well, for one thing, she started off as a songwriter in a songwriting team with her husband, and we're not going to be able to talk about charts this year without talking about Carole King probably several times for each episode, because she dominates this year, 1971. And rightly so. As you said, Tapestry was an absolute milestone. It was a masterpiece.
It absolutely was. And it's later in the same year then that her next album, Music, is released. This really many ways is sort of the year of Carole King. She ushers or helps to usher in the era of the singer-songwriter. And we should maybe make a quick shout out to, again, the great Lou Adler, who shepherds the Tapestry sessions and really insists on them being, kind of informal, almost demo-like. And the warmth of the sessions really comes through and makes it Tapestry one of the great albums of all time.
Well, and consider Carole King had been in the business for almost a decade at that point, for sure. Right?
Yeah, right.
And she knew people. She had close friends that were talented musicians and singers, and so she brought them all into this project. And that was also a departure from the way things were normally done in the business, right? We've talked about the wrecking crew. We've talked about session players providing most of the instrumental background for the hits in the 60s. This was a shift in the direction of a more organic sort of thing, and a more independent thing where the people who you see and you hear on the albums are actually the ones that are playing.
I think that's exactly right. And it also, I think, in its own way, a kind of death knell for the golden era of the session musician, right? It would be the Lou Adler or Carole King model would become more and more the norm in the 1970s, right? And the idea of having these session musicians play on everything, that sort of faded pretty quickly, in fact. I
think with the FM radio and the move toward more album oriented music and hits, that was kind of a natural movement, because it's clearly you had people like Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and so on. They always had their bands. They always had backups, and whether it was a big band or session players. But the new albums were going to go in a different direction and get smaller, and just a handful of people would be making the music, and it would be the people who were the band members.
That's right,
for the most part.
Yeah, that's exactly right. At number 2, then we have the Raiders with their monster hit, Indian Reservation, Lament of the Cherokee People. This again is an era, the early 70s, an era of Native American activism and a kind of growing awareness in the United States that, in fact, well, genocide had been performed in order to try to get the United States settled. This is also, and I think we talked about this a bit last week, this is also the era where Dee Wallace's Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is published.
Right.
It's, in I think its own way, I think Indian Reservation is an important song, and one that is, I think, to some degree, sort of emblematic of the times, the early 70s.
Right, and we're going to see several songs from this era, starting in the 60s, of course, with the protest movements, but in the early 70s, yeah, we're going to have a few more songs like this until mid to late 70s, the protest song dies. It just is not, can't find it anymore.
That's right.
But you have like Mull of Kintyre by Paul McCartney. You have another song that we're going to be talking about a little bit later today, Chicago.
Yeah.
We talked about Ohio during the 70s shows. So the protest song was still alive and well at this point.
That's for sure. So at number 3 is James Taylor, who is becoming a force in popular music at this point. And at number 3 in mid-July is his monster hit, You've Got a Friend. They've got a
right
about this, yeah.
Yeah, we just talked about how Carole King is dominating everything. You've Got a Friend was written by Carole King, performed by her on the Tapestry album with who's singing background? James Taylor.
James Taylor, yeah.
And she actually wrote this for him. You've Got a Friend. We talked about last year he had a hit, 1970, with Fire and Rain. Was going through some very hard times, also with heroin addiction and so on and so forth. And she wanted him to know, you can count on me, I'll be there for you, and wrote this song. And this is essentially a letter to James Taylor, which he is now full circle. He is now singing it.
Yeah, it's really quite a song. It's one of those songs, I think, when we've mentioned these in recent shows, it's one of these popular songs that enters into sort of the pantheon of great American tunes. We have every reason to think that You've Got a Friend will be sung or hummed, in the future decades. This is just one of those songs that has a place in the hearts of most people. And I think for most, James Taylor's version is sort of the quintessential version. But yeah, the Taylor King connection is a profound one, and they remain fast friends. Yeah,
I we'll see it, but I believe in this year, 1971, 4 different artists, including Carole King and James Taylor, will have top 40 hits with this song.
That's unbelievable. Yeah.
So
it's as they say, it's one of those songs that people love to hear, no matter who's singing.
It's a nice sentiment.
Sure,
I'll be there for you.
Yeah. Of course, absolutely. At number 4, well, we've got Don't Pull Your Love by the trio, Hamilton, Joe Frank, and Reynolds. A couple,
yes. And you read it correctly. It's those 3 guys.
Yeah, it's probably
Joe Frank. Strangely enough, his last name is not part of the group name. Hamilton is Dan Hamilton's last name. Reynolds is Tommy Reynolds' last name, but it's Joe Frank Carole. So a very, very strange group name, and we'll have an opportunity. Well, I guess we'll talk a little bit about that right now. But
sure.
This was their first big hit.
That's right.
They will have another one in 1974, Fallen in Love.
Yep. Which
After Reynolds leaves the group.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, Fallen in Love actually gets to #1. Yeah, but Reynolds leaves the group. I think he leaves the group in 72. I think that's right. And Reynolds is replaced in the group, but they don't change their name.
Playboy Records, who is their new record company, insists that they keep the name of the group that they had their first hit with.
This is unbelievable.
And you can argue that it was successful because they did have their first #1 hit with this group name, and after they changed their name to be more accurate, they didn't have another hit ever again, and broke up shortly afterwards. So
there we go. Well, yeah. So maybe those record company executives did know something after all. But it's and so okay. So yeah, Don't Pull Your Love, but Don't Pull Your Love then comes from the pens of Brian Potter and Dennis Lambert, and the Potter Lambert team was a substantial one. And while it may be unfamiliar to you, maybe Potter Lambert doesn't mean anything to you. You probably heard songs like Rock and Roll Heaven. Righteous Brothers did that. You maybe heard a song like Country Boy. Glenn Campbell had a big hit with that.
All right, now
go ahead.
These two work together, and sometimes as songwriting collaborators, and sometimes as producers.
Yes.
Now they produced Rock and Roll Heaven with the Righteous Brothers, and they produced Rhinestone Cowboy, Baby Come Back for Player.
Oh yeah.
But they did write Country Boy for Glenn Campbell, so they wrote and produced that one. They also wrote Ain't No Woman But Like the One I Got from Four Tops, One Tin Soldier that two groups had hits with in 1970. Lambert wrote We Built This City for Jefferson Starship.
Starship, yeah. Right.
And Night Shift for the Commodores. So these guys were, they were in the thick of it, right?
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. And so, and we'll put it in the playlist, kind of an amusing clip from Mystery Theater 3000.
I think 3000.
Yeah, about the name Hamilton, Joe, Frank, and Reynolds, and the confusion that there always was about how many members were in the group. But they did have.
And this is apparently really a confusion that like everybody has always had about this group. So
I have to confess that I thought, and I think like everybody, I thought there were 4 people in the group. Hamilton, Joe, Frank, and Reynolds, and so we don't have to belabor this, but
there is one. There was a running joke from Dan Ingram, a DJ at WABC AM. He would always introduce the group as Hamilton, Joe, Frank Reynolds, and the entire Eyewitness News team.
Frank Reynolds from ABC. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Oh,
that's great.
So there's that too. So people have had a lot of fun with this, but we'll put that video up.
Excellent. So at let's see. So at number 5, then we talked about this group last week. It's the Cornelius Brothers and Sister Rose Family Act with Treat Her Like a Lady. They had a couple of hits, and I don't have much more to say than that.
Well, look. All right, I need to say one thing about this.
Okay, fair enough.
When we talked about this last episode, last month, I said that Treat Her Like a Lady had also been done by the Temptations, and that their version was vastly superior. And I'm wrong. I was wrong. I will correct that now. The Cornelius Brothers and Sister Rose version of Treat Her Like a Lady was the definitive version, the better version. And I humbly take back everything I said last month.
Well, this is an important moment. And so we all appreciate, including the Cornelius Brothers and Sister Rose, appreciate your mea culpa. So fair enough. At so let's see. Oh yeah, so at number 6 is a kind of one-hit wonder, and that's Gene Knight with Mr. Big Stuff. Mr. Big Stuff would peak at number 2 on the pop charts, but would hit number 1 on the R&B soul charts, and would be the number 1 soul record in 1971, which is saying something because this was a big era for soul records. This would be it for Gene Knight. But Gene Knight was a part of the Stax label. She was part of the Stax stable, and again, Stax was an enormously important blues and gospel and soul label. And
was that in Nashville or in Memphis?
Well, it was actually in Mississippi. In Mississippi.
Oh, really?
Eventually made its way to Memphis.
Okay.
Made its way, and it was founded by this Jim Stewart and his sister Estelle Axton, who then combined their names to make Stax. Stax probably was never more influential than it was when it had Otis Redding as its lead figure. Of course, Otis Redding died tragically, but Stax was a big deal. And
well, so, Curtis Mayfield was huge for them as well. But we'll absolutely have to talk about Stax Records at some point.
Absolutely,
in our Behind the Curtain series.
I just want to,
they're very influential. Yeah.
No question. It was really one of the most important labels, maybe in the history of records. Knight put down the tracks for this at the Malaco Studios in Jackson, Mississippi, and the Malaco Studios too were a very important place for gospel and blues. It was, it's just interesting. Gene Knight again is sort of the classic kind of one-hit wonder, and this is it's a song about an empowered woman, telling off a guy, but she was part of a larger movement in popular music, where Black artists were were hitting the big time and were more represented in the industry. You would see Black artists more on television. Their status was being elevated, and she was definitely a part of this wave in 71. There's no question. This is a big record for her. Let's see, at number 7 then, those crazy kids from Downey, California, the Carpenters with Rainy Days and Mondays. And I guess in many ways, 1971 is sort of the year of the Carpenters. Quick thought about Rainy Days and Mondays, Dave.
Well, I just noticed that this Hot 100 chart had a lot of meteorological references. There were 3 songs with rainy in the title, and another, if you count B-sides, another one with rain. We also have Ain't No Sunshine.
Yes.
So,
well,
for what it's worth, this is the first of several songs making reference to. Well, it's kind of appropriate. At least here, it's very rainy right now. So.
Well, that's a very astute observation, Dave, and rain is very evocative. But the Carpenters, this is where they're beginning to sort of build their foundation as kind of cultural icons. And as everyone knows, as we've talked about a bit, Karen Carpenter dies a very young woman, but yet the Carpenters remain an enormously popular group, and their songs are almost at some level timeless. And they begin to make this all happen in 70, 71. And Rainy Days and Mondays is certainly a part of their.
And as long as we saw the 45 cover there. The B-side was Saturday, one of the very few songs written and sung by Richard Carpenter.
That's interesting. Yeah, he was mostly a keyboards arranger. Rarely got on the mic in a lead sort of way. Well, absolutely. Let's go to number 8 then. Number 8 is, man, it's a great song. This is the Tommy James number, Draggin' the Line.
Oh man, this was one of the first 45s that I ever had as a kid. And for my money, it's one of the all-time great 45s because you have Draggin' the Line as the A side and Bits and Pieces as the
Yep.
B-side, and they're both just fantastic.
Yes,
Of course,
absolutely.
these come from the album Christian of the World, which was his second solo effort after leaving the Shondells, or after the Shondells disbanded.
Yeah.
Did you know that he like died on stage? Tommy James,
Oh,
having massive drug problems and stuff, right?
yeah.
He died on stage, and
Good Lord.
they had to resuscitate him. And after that, he took some time off. The Shondells disbanded, and then he came back, and his music was more introspective. His Christian beliefs started to inform
Okay.
more of what he was writing.
Yeah.
But Draggin the Line was the biggest hit off this album, but Bits and Pieces was also just fantastic.
Those are great songs, both of them great songs, absolutely.
This was Tommy James wrote this along with Bob King. Bob King produced, and strangely enough, because Bob King played a very important role in that era of the Tommy James hit making, I wasn't able to find out anything about him. So any listeners out there that know a little bit about Bob King, the songwriter and producer, feel free to comment and let us know a little bit more about Bob King. Background vocals were done by the Steventown Singers. Released 1971 in June. As I said, just fantastic. It's hard to beat this single for concentrated hit power.
Wow. It's just got a wicked bass line. It's Tommy James had a real ear for a hit. And he was a kind of, in addition to being a performer, he was a kind of impresario, right? He put together groups, and he, wrote some songs for other people. Very, very talented guy. But it's interesting, he's going through a kind of personal transformation roughly at this time, and maybe
right.
maybe just in time, in fact, as described. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, let's so from Tommy James then, let's think about that Australian trio, the Bee Gees, because at number 9 they're hitting the American charts with "How Can You Mend a Broken Heart," which is it's one of the great songs ever from the Bee Gees.
Yeah, one of the great songs ever. In fact, a documentary about the Bee Gees was titled "How Do You Mend a Broken Heart," written by Barry and Robin, and later Maurice is also credited with songwriting for this song. For the Trafalgar album,
right,
which was the second album after their breakup. After Odessa, there was some tension among the brothers.
Yes.
Robin left, went solo, and then basically because they got sick of sitting around conference tables and having lawyers just tear each other holes, they decided, all right, screw it, we're not going to do this to each other anymore. Right. Got back together. This was one of the first songs that Barry and Robin wrote together, along with Lonely Days.
Yes.
That was one songwriting session. So clearly they were glad to be back together. And How Can You Mend a Broken Heart could possibly be read as How Can You Mend a Broken Band?
Sure, I think that's right.
They wrote it quickly. Robin said, quote, "The whole thing took about an hour to complete." So, end quote. They originally offered this to Andy Williams, by the way.
I can see
that. Who actually covered it then, but they recorded it first. But Andy Williams, listen to this. This is a song that like everybody covered. Everybody loved the song.
Oh,
Everybody covered the song.
absolutely, yeah.
And among others, Andy Williams on his "You've Got a Friend" album.
Of course, that's right.
You know,
Yeah,
who,
yeah.
and that was recorded in June 1971, as was Johnny Mathis's "You've Got a Friend" album.
Of course.
And Johnny Mathis also covered this song. In fact, 7 of the 11 songs that were on the Johnny Mathis "You've Got a Friend" album appeared on Andy Williams' "You've Got a Friend" album. This was just one of them.
No,
that's
you got your research staff working overtime on that one.
Oh, well, they love this strange and exotic
but it really
stuff.
it goes to the point you made earlier, though, that these songs that are being written and recorded they're beloved, and they're almost instant classics, right? And so everybody wants to sort of take a turn at it, and so there's a lot of overlap, let's say.
That includes people like Al Green, Cher, Teddy Pendergrass, Michael Bublé, Julio Iglesias, Barry Manilow, Diana Krall, Rod Stewart, and Florence Henderson.
Oh, Florence Henderson.
Florence Henderson covered this song for the Brady Bunch Variety Hour.
Well, yes. Well, that was a golden period in her career for sure.
Oh, it was.
This is the Bee Gees really have kind of sort of their two careers, right? There is their career as balladeers in a sense, and then of course they have their disco era. But the Bee Gees wrote some of the most raw and open lyrics of any. Those songs are they're just amazingly, the singer, the protagonist in these songs is just amazingly vulnerable. Yeah. And one of the interesting things that I've heard over the years is one of the great Bee Gees fans of all time is John Lydon, Johnny Rotten, who in fact has been quite explicit in the fact that he just thinks that as songwriters, few ever took the kinds of risks that the Bee Gees did, because these songs are just, they're just, people who sing them are just sort of wide open. It's just really,
really that's
powerful.
True.
They're really powerful, I think. Yeah.
And this will actually be at the #1 slot next month. And this is their first #1 hit in the US. But it didn't chart at all in England. Isn't that strange?
It is strange. Is it not the case that the Bee Gees, and you probably have a better sense, I don't know that the Bee Gees were ever as popular in Britain as they were in the United States. They were obviously wildly popular in Australia, but I think the British held the Bee Gees sort of at arm's length a bit. They were wildly popular in the US, of course, but
yeah, I never had any feel for that until I read this about their #1 hit in the US not even charting. So I thought, wow, it's just like,
it's kind of staggering.
That's strange.
Yeah, it is strange. Yeah, and so the Bee Gees are, really an important group. Obviously, an important group, and
so I remember being, this is one of those situations for me where I knew them when a few years later, of course, they'd become the biggest thing since sliced bread. They'd become huge, the #1 superstars of the late 70s.
Right.
And when people discovered them as a disco group, I thought,
yes.
Man, now they're making mediocre music and everybody loves them. They've been making great music for over a decade and nobody cared, so.
It's interesting to say that. I had the Bee Gees Greatest Hits Volume 1 in middle school, I think. And it's Massachusetts. And
that's fantastic. This is fantastic stuff.
It's fantastic. Yeah. And like you say, they were sort of rediscovered or discovered in this disco era. It's like, wait a minute, what about all these incredible songs from the late 60s and early 70s? Yeah, I know. And exactly what you mean. It's funny. So we have the Bee Gees then with How Do You Mend a Broken Heart. At #10 is Carly Simon. And Carly Simon is just getting, her career is just starting to get traction. And at number 10 is the hit, That's the Way I Always Heard It Should Be. It ends up peaking at number 10, but it really is the start of a very big, next 5 years or so for Simon. Simon had a lot of success in the 1970s, as we all know. Hit number 1 with You're So Vain in 72. She put five songs in the top 10. Her background is interesting, right? She comes from, I think it's fair to say, a fairly privileged background. Her father was one of the founders of Simon & Schuster publication. She sang for a long time with her sister Lucy, the Simon sisters. In fact, she had just recently kind of split up from Lucy professionally to start her solo career. She had just signed with Elektra Records. And so this is Simon in her earliest incarnation, but I think it hints at some of the sophistication you see with some of her other songs. I always thought she was a very interesting singles artist. Do you have a couple thoughts about Simon, Dave? Carly Simon?
Well, I love this song for one thing, and a number of songs that she'll be producing within the next several years. Yeah, a very interesting singer-songwriter. Of course, she'll end up marrying James Taylor, who we talked about earlier, and doing a fantastic duet with him. Mockingbird is one of, yeah.
It's so good.
Most fun songs.
Yes, it really is.
So. Yeah, I really enjoyed her in this period.
I have to say too, I did too. And when you talked earlier about the formation of the Women's Political Collective there, it was always my sense that Simon was, she was kind of connected to that her songs were about strong women. Her songs were about challenging convention. And so in a way, you talk about the organization of women politically, then on the charts, then we're starting to hear songs that really challenge the idea of what women need to do, what women need to be. And I always thought that Simon was very much at the forefront of that.
Okay. I don't really have a feel for that, but it seems plausible at least. So
so from there then let's cherry pick a little bit from the rest of the chart. At number 11 is it's another big song. Then maybe it has not really, I don't know if it really, people have a sense of it today, but it's she's not just another woman from the Eighth Day. The Eighth Day was a group created from a group of studio musicians in Detroit. And the Eighth Day was a kind of product of the Hamilton Dozier Holland Dozier Holland collective, right? And that HDH
from Motown,
who then created their own label Invictus. They were really starting to Holland Dozier Holland were really starting to kind of create a very distinctive sound, a kind of stable of artists, and they were having a lot of hits. And while she's not just another woman is it's okay. It's not a song that's going to maybe stand the test of time. I think it's evidence of the amount of power that HDH is having in popular music. And it also emphasizes the role that Detroit plays. And maybe we should talk about that for a second, Dave, that Detroit in the late 60s and early 1970s was a real fulcrum of popular culture, right? And that popular music, that whether it's Motown, whether it's Invictus, that there's a lot happening in Detroit. And you can make the argument that for Black music in the early 1970s, it's not LA, but it's Detroit where the real action is.
Well, yeah, I think that's right. It's an incredible nexus of things coming together in Detroit. For one thing, they had a really incredible music program in their public schools.
Yes.
So that a lot of the Black youth that were coming up through the Detroit school system had a really good basis for creating music, for understanding music.
Yeah, I think that's
and there was a real appreciation too, I think, for especially from the workers, auto workers, and so on, for
absolutely
blues music. In fact, Gordy had, well, his first business went bust because he had a jazz records store.
yeah, Barry Gordy, right?
And nobody wanted the jazz. They'd come in and they'd ask for different blues artists. Oh, we don't carry blues.
Yeah.
And then they walk back out without buying anything. So
they knew what they wanted. You know, you mentioned that the Detroit Public Schools, this is of course at the, it's still at the height of the Motor City. Detroit had a very robust tax base. Detroit was a kind of, I mean, honestly, a kind of model city. Great schools, you know, working city, you know, a city that, you know, had a kind of purpose. And the bottom fell out of Detroit, obviously. And that obviously influenced everything. But this is still in the era where Detroit is, where there's just so much happening in Detroit. And this is just another example of it. It's a small example, you know, small single, but Detroit was
right. But this is still pre-oil crisis, right?
That's exactly right.
That's what it's all about.
And once the oil crisis hits, we'll talk about that. But once the oil crisis hits, and the price of gas goes through the roof, and people realize that the cars they're driving get like 9 miles a gallon.
Yeah.
That they, you know, that Detroit has, you know, some difficulty in responding to that.
Yes.
And then all hell breaks loose in Detroit, and the bottom falls out, and it never has stopped. I mean, Detroit has been in free fall for really almost 5 decades now.
Yeah,
it's really one of the great American tragedies. So let's cherry pick a little bit more. You've got an interesting one here at number 13, Dave. It's the Grassroots, and Sooner or Later.
Sooner or Later, yeah. Just one of those songs that I remember hearing in the car all the time during 1971. It was released in 1971, May 1971, as a single, and then it became available on their 16 Greatest Hits compilation.
Okay.
This actually peaked at number 9, which made it Grassroots' third and last top 10 hit.
Okay.
Now, interesting about this is that the producer was Steve Barry. Steve Barry was the vice president for A&R at Dunhill Records.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He also produced Don't Pull Your Love. Don't Pull Your Love Out. So,
of course he did. Well, as we've talked about, it's a small world, right? It's a small
yes,
world
it is.
in LA, in the popular music scene, even in the early 70s. And so, yes.
But Dunhill had opted the rights for Don't Pull Your Love Out for Grassroots. And they found it just a little bit too bland.
Okay.
So they passed on that, which of course then opened the door for others.
Can you tell me? The Grassroots, Dave, themselves. Was there a sense that the Grassroots were kind of a manufactured band, or it's I don't know this for certain, but it always struck me that these were almost sort of guns for hire, but maybe that's unfair. What do we know about the Grassroots?
I don't know. Grassroots had, I can't tell you much about the history. Of course, this is, as I said, their third top 10 hit, but they'd also just a quick aside here.
Yeah, sure.
The B-side of this was I Can Turn Off the Rain.
Of course
so
it is.
Keeping in our rainy day topic. So I have no idea. I know Rob Grill.
Yeah,
was the lead vocalist.
He's the face of the Roots.
He was the lead vocalist and the bassist. And he shared the vocals on this one with Dennis Provisor. And only Provisor played on the recording, and the rest of the instrumental was provided by the Wrecking Crew.
This is what I'm getting at a little bit.
Yeah.
Manufactured, and this again was very common, and we talked about this during our shows dealing with the Wrecking Crew. But the Grassroots were a kind of band and name only a bit, in that the music that you heard was being delivered by the Wrecking Crew, by these great session musicians. It strikes me that, okay, so the Grassroots, they have a hit with Midnight Confessions and Temptation Eyes, and sooner or later a Grassroots greatest hits album that'd be a strong LP. I can imagine that.
Yes,
that would be
no, absolutely. They had a number of really strong hits, and I remember I enjoyed the Grassroots a lot.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So there's that. There's
so in keeping
sooner
with
or later.
Sooner or later. In keeping with your rain metaphor, then we're going to maybe cherry pick another one here. At number 16, you have the Fortunes with "Here Comes That Rainy Day Feeling Again."
Yeah. By the way, the other song with "Rainy" in the title is "Rainy Jane" by Davy Jones.
Imagine you coming up with a Davy Jones song, a solo number from Mr. Jones.
I had not been familiar with it, and after listening to it, I can understand why it was not memorable, but it does fill out our list of rainy songs very nicely.
Yes, it does. Our bingo card is full.
This was by "Here Comes That Rainy Day Feeling Again" by the Fortunes, released in May '71. It was the third top 40 hit for the Fortunes. "You've Got Troubles"
Yes.
Reached number 7.
That's a good song.
Yeah, and "Here It Comes Again" at number 27. So "Here It Comes Again" was the hit that they had before "Here Comes That Rainy Day Feeling Again." Okay. Apparently they felt like that was a lucky combination of words. The song was written by Tony McCauley, Roger Cook, and Roger Greenaway. Now, McCauley was responsible for a number of hits, but particularly interesting here was the Cook Greenaway connection. They wrote a number of songs together. Started off in business as a song, as a singer team, a duet called David and Jonathan. They're both called Roger, but the group was called David and Jonathan.
Okay.
Had some modest success as singers, but really they really made their impact as songwriters. They're the ones that wrote "You've Got Your Troubles." They wrote "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing."
Yes. And
"Long Cool Woman in a Black Dress."
Ooh. Oh.
So
that's a great song.
An interesting little factoid is that Roger Cook, who moved to Nashville in 1976, is the only Brit to be inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame.
Is that right? Is the only?
So there's that.
Really? Huh.
He's the only, yes.
Well, that's it. That's interesting factoid. This is a fine song. It is a fine song. This is one of those songs that that when I hear it, I listen to the whole thing. I just there's something about this that it's just captivating even all these decades later. It's a great song.
Yes, and this song kept my other 45s company. This was one of. I think I had 3 45s, and one of them, of course, was "Draggin' the Line," and then there's this one, and I think "I Woke Up in Love This Morning" by the Partridge
Family. Yeah.
Those were my 345s, so they got a lot of play. But this was one of them.
That's
Absolutely,
cool.
I love this.
That's awesome. It's I remember my 45s too. Real quickly, my first 45 was Rare Earth's Get Ready. I believe my second 45 was Barry Manilow's Mandy, and my 45 was the Linda Ronstadt version of Heatwave. And
yes.
So there we go. We always remember the first albums that we brought. Let's cherry pick a little bit more. At number 18 is a group that had very little chart success, but I think in terms of the music of the early 70s, few groups were more important than Delaney and Bonnie and Friends. It's kind of an odd thing, but what we have here is at number 18 a song called Never Ending, a Never Ending Song of Love, which peaks at number 13. It's a song that is a kind of folkish folkish song that is recorded by lots of other people, re-recorded by the New Seekers, Crystal Gale, even the Osmonds take a stab at it. But what's important about Delaney and Bonnie and Friends is that Delaney and Bonnie and Friends became a kind of collective, music collective, a kind of traveling show of people kind of in and out of the band. And this and Friends moniker included people like Leon Russell, George Harrison, Eric Clapton, Duane Allman, Graham Parsons, Bobby Keys. I mean, you name it, they probably played in Friends. And in fact, Eric Clapton has been very explicit about the influence that that Delaney Bramlett had in his guitar playing. He basically says that sort of Delaney taught him how to play guitar, and that the Delaney and Bonnie provided a refuge for Clapton in the wake of the collapse of Cream and Blind Faith and so on. And so they never had much chart success, right? They just never were really that important a group on the charts. But I think they provided a kind of refuge. I think that's the word, a kind of refuge for a lot of people. And in that sense, they were really important. Delaney Bramlett grew up in Mississippi, made his way to LA, where he met up with a guy named Leon Russell from Oklahoma. They ended up joining forces. Whereas Bonnie Bramlett grew up in Illinois. For a brief time, she was an Ikette. She was, I think, at 14 or 15, Ikette for a few weeks. She eventually then became involved with Delaney. They got married. Theirs was a stormy relationship, a lot of substance abuse, but their albums, the studio albums in particular, they recorded were really highly thought of. Those of you who are into Roseanne, the Roseanne sitcom, Bonnie Bramlett played in the first couple of seasons in Roseanne as a co-worker of Roseanne. Oh. She was, maybe even went by the name of Bonnie. I can't remember for sure, but she was.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think I remember her.
She was in Roseanne. They had a child, Becca Bramlett, who was for a short time in Fleetwood Mac. She was in the version of Fleetwood Mac when Fleetwood Mac was disintegrating in the early 1990s. But Delaney Bramlett died, I believe 2008. Bonnie's still alive and still performs on occasion. But it's a very interesting cast of characters that makes, I think, the Delaney and Bonnie and Friends a group worth remembering. And so, a never-ending song at love at number 18. At number 19 is, we're going to finish up with a couple of political songs. And at number 19 is Freda Payne's Bring the Boys Home. Excuse me. Freda Payne is probably best known for her hit of a couple years earlier, Band of Gold. But Bring the Boys Home was actually a pretty big song in 71. It peaked at number 12 on the pop charts and number 4 on the soul R&B charts. And what's sort of interesting about this song is that it comes really at the height of the Vietnam protest movement, particularly when excuse me, protesters began to really speak about the disparity in the U.S. military in terms of African Americans in service. The U.S. military in Vietnam in the early 1970s, despite the fact that there was a draft, it was quite over representative people of color and also people who were from impoverished backgrounds, as is oftentimes the case with armies, right? And so the chorus of bring the boys home, bring them back alive, bring them back alive. And this song, despite its popularity in the United States, was banned by Armed Forces Radio, and which, you know, sort of, I think, if nothing else, sort of added to its notoriety. But it's also on the Invictus label, which we've talked about before. It's Freda Payne really had sort of two big songs, Band of Gold and Bring the Boys Home. But it's just interesting to note that politics is really entering into the conversation when it comes to popular music, whether it's a Black performer or, as we'll talk about here, a performer from a kind of super group who grew up in Great Britain. So let's move to the last song we want to talk about today. And it's right now it's at number 36. And it's Graham Nash's Chicago, which is
right.
Very
it will peak at number 19. But this is from his album, Songs for Beginners. It's a solo album. And one of the reasons that he left the Hollies was because he wasn't allowed to indulge in this sort of political singing. And Graham Nash talks about songs as being kind of musical news. He thinks they should be topical, that they should speak to the issues of the day. And that's something that his bandmates in Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, I think they all bought into that idea.
I do, yeah, I agree.
But when they were approached by Wavy Gravy to perform at a benefit for the Chicago 7,
yeah,
Crosby was okay with that. Stills and Young didn't really want to do it, so they ended up not doing that. But part of this is addressed to those two as well. Won't you please come to Chicago just to sing?
Yes, that's right.
For instance. So this is a protest song too. I guess the third one on our list in this episode.
Right.
And it's protesting essentially the Chicago 7 trial and what happened leading up to that, the police riots at the Democratic National Convention in 1968. Yeah. The Chicago 7, originally 8 members were being tried for conspiracy to incite a riot.
That's right.
And it's a complicated issue, and what's going on in that courtroom is complicated as well. But there are certain things about it that aren't complicated at all. And one of them is if you have bound a Black man to a chair, had him chained and essentially beaten into submission and gagged in a court of law in America.
That's right.
Something isn't going the way it should. And I think that's something that most people can agree on. Although, to be perfectly fair, there were numerous Americans who felt like what was going on there was something that that all of those guys deserved. So
I dare say a slim majority of Americans thought that at the time, you know.
Yeah. So it was. He said, Nash said, when I saw them bind and chain Bobby Seale to a chair and put a gag in his mouth and put him in the witness box and try to call that a fair trial, every fiber of my Englishness said, wait a second, that's just not fair. So songs is news, and the news is that people have individual feelings. It was a lot like other things that were going on in the group, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, just responses, visceral responses to what they were seeing and what they were hearing about, like Southern Man or like Ohio. Unlike Ohio by Neil Young, which was released just 10 days after the shootings at Kent State, Chicago, We Can Change the World, didn't appear until 1971, 3 years after the Democratic
Yeah,
National.
full 3 years. Yeah, it's quite a time, actually, in this era, quite a distance.
It's worth mentioning that one of the background singers, backup singers on this was Rita Coolidge.
Oh, yes.
And she and Nash were dating at that time. After apparently resolving something of a love triangle that had developed with Stephen Stills, and caused a lot of friction.
Yes.
Which was one reason probably that Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young didn't put out any albums between 1971 and 1976.
Yep.
Well, so there's that. There's that as well. I mean, that was going on as well.
Well, that's the, boy, you talk about a complicated group. 3 or 4 individuals that are, they're just explosive. But
love-hate relationships all around, I think.
Absolutely. From the very beginning. This isn't something that's just flared up recently. It's always been like this. But this is, I think, like you say, a really important song. And I do think that it speaks to the very politicized nature of the era, that anger about the war was still palpable. Civil rights movement, women's empowerment, burgeoning gay rights movement. There's just a lot happening in the United States. And it was just an enormously tumultuous time. And you see this tumult, each month in the charts, right? I mean, many of these songs are, overtly political, and they are, people listen to them. They're everywhere. Okay, so let's, Dave, you want to have some final words here as we wrap up the July 1971 chart show?
Sure. If you enjoyed what you watched today, and we hope you did, you can subscribe here to find more content of this sort. You can look up here to find other episodes of 50 Years Ago this month. And here, especially important, you can find our playlists for today's episode, where you'll find all the songs that we talked about as videos. Absolutely. And each month we include a reading list. So check that out, as well as then look for us on Twitter, Stephen Daves 1 on Twitter. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.